me to not record then?
You can record too. That's fine. As backup.
Dude, it's mostly for you. Okay, I'll
Okay.
record it.
Okay. Well, I'd be curious to see what your version looks like. Whether it's, I don't know, maybe it's smaller. Okay. So yeah, Mike Pareto. My background again is in video games and animation, and the last few years I've been working mostly with VR and AR games, and a number of different sort of experimental things. And I need to share my screen, don't I? Hold on. Here we go. And I'll move that off of there so you can see. So this particular game is one that actually was pitched to me by a friend of mine in Toronto who I grew up with, and it's been something that he was kind of kicking around for a while, and I decided to sort of, since I've got some downtime, to kind of work on it with him, and we've been sort of evolving it. And apologies ahead of time if any of this is sort of politically incorrect, but that's just the way I go. And my objectives today are really, I'm not looking for money, I'm not looking for help, I'm just kind of really want to see if you understand the concept. Because it's a little bit complex, and it's just trying to find the right way to explain it, and also to just get feedback and see what kind of response you guys have to this idea. So the sort of big picture is, I find it's always good to kind of, when these sort of pitch decks, to sort of combine a couple of things together to give people a bit of a picture. So imagine the house of the future. It's all automated. You've got robots or just cool things that are sort of basically automated, and you sort of mix that with The Walking Dead. This is basically what we're sort of looking at. And the way this, and what I'm going to do is sort of run you through what the player does in order to sort of get into the main gameplay loop of the game. Just again, to sort of understand, and the game sort of starts off with a this kind of Nigerian chain letter, which is kind of what you had before you had email. These things have been around for a long time, and it's just it's a bit of a jokey thing. But the key part of this is that you've inherited this mansion, in effect, and they need you to sort of take it over. And this is all you really know as a player, is that you're kind of drawn into the story by, okay, I got to go look after this mansion. What's that going to be about? Well, you go to the mansion. There's this head in a jar that is sleeping, dead. You're not quite sure. It's a head in a jar. Probably dead. If it's a head in the jar, it would make more sense. And there's a little bit of a note that basically is kind of goading you to go and do something, effectively solve this initial puzzle. Where it's saying, like, generate some reanimation jelly and add it to the jar. And let's just see that. Yeah. And so the only thing you've got, other than the head, and sorry, I didn't really mention, this is a nice Victorian mansion, lots of wooden banisters and library-ish type things and paneling, etc., etc. And in this mansion, there's a head and there's like a machine. And this machine has, and it's a little hard, I realize I should have changed this slide, but that's not a hand at the back. It's basically like a disembodied hand just kind of sitting there. It's effectively like some meat. And your first challenge is to kind of figure out how this machine works, what is it all about. And so you figure out by sort of playing with it. And again, I didn't mention at the beginning, this is a VR game. So it's very experiential, and you basically go up to this machine and you're like, what do I do? You pull the handle, you poke at it, etc. So you figure out that the handle goes down, and then this raw material kind of goes in, and then it generates this green goo. And so if we go back, we say the head basically wanted you to add some goo. So you take the goo, you add it to the head wakes up, and kind of explains now, okay, great, you've hit that first challenge, and now effectively what you need to do is go and find some more raw material to feed this machine, because there was only a tiny little bit of goo that was generated from that first one. So in order to kind of assist you in that, the head gives you, well, first of all, you need to figure out where to find this raw material, and just happens to be that next door there's this kind of biker bar. And in order to help you get your raw material, sorry, here's some raw material just hanging out. the head gives you this little thing, which is called the enslavatron. And the enslavatron is basically this kind of thing that, and I'll describe what it looks like a little bit later. It's not going to look quite as Fisher-Price as this, but in essence it is. And if you look at the little video there, you can see what you do is you kind of shoot the goo, the green goo, at the patron in the bar, and then you use a little joystick to sort of drive him around. So effectively, you're sort of hypnotizing him, you're zombifying him, and then controlling him. So you're driving him around with this little joystick. And so what you do is you go grab him, drive him around, bring him back to the mansion. He becomes the raw material that goes into your machine. You process him, generate some more goo, feed the head, and the cycle sort of continues. And at this point, then the head sort of, you kind of level up. This is sort of all really kind of a tutorial phase until you figure out really what the kind of main kind of gameplay loop is here. And basically the head is saying, well, the next thing you need to do is you need to automate this machine so that you can just continue to generate goo, which is kind of the fuel that other things run on in this game. And in order to do that, to do the automation, he gives you this other device called a recorder. And sort of between this and the original enslavatron, this is sort of kind of the core piece of technology that you get in the game. And the way this works is, and this is sort of the kind of unique and possibly confusing concept, is that what it does is you basically record motions that the bar patrons are doing, and I'll explain this a little bit more, and then you kind of capture them, and then you can play them back as a loop on those individuals. And I'll show you an example here. So the first thing you need to do is look at the machine, figure out what that motion is. So in this case, the motion is basically this hand going up and down. Sorry, that's the motion, is this hand going up and down. Then you need to go to the bar, and you need to find like somebody who's doing that motion. And they might be doing like, you know, what this guy's doing, and then maybe he'll do something else, like drink a beer or pass it on to somebody, and then you know, maybe go back to do that. So he will be doing a specific loop that's maybe, you know, 30 seconds long at the most, but somewhere in there he'll be doing this motion, and you need to find the person in the bar that's doing that. Then you try.
Just gonna interject and say
Yep. Say what?
7 minutes.
Okay, 7 minutes. Thank you. I got to keep going. All right, you drive him back to the mansion, and then you assign him. Basically, you play back that motion on the machine, and then he becomes kind of the automaton that's going to be driving this machine and generating goo. And now that's done, you can kind of move on. So the basic loop of the game you've now established, which is you analyze a machine for motion, you find a victim who is basically doing that motion, you record, you enslave, you assign to the machine, and then that allows you to unlock a new machine or an ability. Basically, it just progresses and it keeps going around and around. And then these things are just continuously doing different things, like powering the lights in the house or powering an elevator, or et cetera, et cetera. One of the little side effects here as well is that the slaves decay over time. So you do eventually need to replace them, because they're not really feeding them. They're just kind of these automatons. And that you can either prolong their life by kind of giving them more goo, or even prolong them in their zombie form. So that's the kind of gameplay loop. And then generally, sort of from the start to finish of the game, what happens is you know, this call to adventure is basically coming to the mansion. You learn that general loop that I was talking about. You unlock new rooms, and in this case, you're also unlocking rooms that have heads in them. So this is the sort of long story here, is that there's a series of rooms that are like the first one, and each one has a head in a jar, and each one of those represents like a decade or 2 decades of time, because what happens eventually is you slowly learn the backstory, which is that you're the last person in the chain, and at the end of the game, you basically become the next head in the jar and send out the chain letter to someone else. So very quickly, I'm probably running out of time. So it's built for VR. Like I said, you're not using buttons or anything. You're just using hands to control the things that are in there. The props are like just easy to use, except that I didn't really talk about the 1800s, but I'm running out of time. And I'm going to keep going here just to talk quickly about the visual style. So the style for the props and the mansion are kind of sort of steampunk, but not as steamy. More Jules Verne type brass and a wood and very fine polished things, kind of like you would have seen in like the game Riven or Myst or some games like that. I'm done.
You're done?
Or well, I'm not done, but I hear a timer going off, so I'm probably done.
Okay, yeah, the timer is.
I'm basically, this is my last slide. So so the bar itself is this kind of grungy biker bar, and the thing is, as you kind of progress through the rooms in the mansion, you see pictures of the bar as it was like decades previously. So you kind of, there's a little bit of a Back to the Future aspect to it, where you see one kind of setting the bar that you see it change over time, even if it's only through photographs. But you get this kind of sense that there's some history there, and that's pretty much it. There you go.
Very cool.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Good job, man.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Very cool.
Just squeaked in by the 10 minutes almost.
Yeah.
that was really good.
Who wants to go?
I only have a couple questions.
Okay.
It's funny, like I wrote a bunch of stuff down, but then you just got to the next slide and answered it.
Okay, good.
So yeah, first and foremost, like that was excellent. Just walking me through the core mechanic and then the setting, and then like answering all my questions was absolutely great.
Great.
So I guess where the gameplay takes place, is it mostly just in the mansion and the bar?
Well, it's sort of between the two of them. So yes, it's probably more in the mansion, but well, no, I'd say it's actually probably about 50-50, because you're going to need to, be sort of, as the puzzles get a little more complex, like you might get a machine that has, a more complex action, and you have to sort of spend some time in the bar kind of observing. I don't want it to be too much of that, because I think that's going to be boring.
Right.
But that also at the same time needs to kind of increase in complexity. Also thinking about that there may be some puzzles or some machines that require maybe one motion on the top of the body and another motion on the bottom of the body. Like, maybe someone walking on a treadmill or something. And that then part of the complexity is that you've got to then mix and match those together on like one body.
Okay. Actually, that goes really well to my next question, which is, can you maybe describe a puzzle that I would get stuck on and what that puzzle would look like?
Okay, well, yeah, that would definitely be one of them.
You kind of just did, yeah. If you want to elaborate on that.
Well, and another one would be that there may be something that needs to be triggered in the bar. So one of the puzzles that we've talked about was that there's a guy standing by a jukebox, and you want to make him like do like the pogo.
Yeah.
Because there's like a pogo puzzle, there's something that, whatever, it requires a pogo puzzle. So you need to go put a quarter in the jukebox, right? So that, maybe that's would be one sort of puzzle where it requires a bit of interaction from you. But other ones are probably more really just in the analyzing of the motion. And I mean, it's a good question. It's something that we have a bunch of ideas for, but haven't really like nailed that, what exactly that progression is yet.
Okay.
You want to stop sharing first?
Sure, I can do that.
And then one last question, and I guess without getting too into the weeds, you showed a lot about like the story arc and the different like heads. So would the game, would the story be more like, actually, just have you played Seventh Guest?
Years ago, but
okay, it kind of reminds me of Seventh Guest.
Well, yeah, that's actually like I was saying, my co-designer was really well, Seventh Guest was even before that, but he was kind of basing a lot of stuff off of Riven and Myst.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, Seventh Guest, was sort of the predecessor to that.
So the story, would it be more so like Seventh Guest or Myst or Riven? Their story is more sort of like a lore. It's like telling you a thing that happened in the past. Whereas this story more, there's characters interacting and it's taking place sort of as you watch the story.
That's a good question, and I did sort of touch upon that. Basically, the story is that effectively back in the 1800s, this was all sort of, and there's a little bit of a kind of even more backstory to that, But way back in the 1800s, there was someone who discovered basically this green goo, whether it came from a satellite or whatever, and discovered that it was a way to sort of reanimate corpses, and then kind of spilled it on themselves and discovered it was a way to sort of like make their own motions like repeat in a pattern. And so this
Yeah.
is one of the sort of deeper secrets that you eventually discover. And then what they did in this kind of idea of home automation, which you often think about as happening kind of more in the 50s, and that's sort of where we started too.
Right.
He was actually doing this way back sort of in the Jules Verne time. And so that's why a lot of the machines that and the devices were actually built by the original person who sort of discovered this. And so they're made out of brass and all that, sort of finely crafted. Not like the one that I showed there because I haven't had time to build it yet.
Right.
But ultimately they would. And so basically he sort of, his story arc kind of ends at the point where he tries to have eternal life and ends up as a head in the jar and then passes it on. So he's got a little pocket of time, which is way back in the 1800s. And then the next head is like, the next 2 decades later or whatever. And then the next, and there's a room that goes with that and a little pocket of time around the bar as well. So really
Okay.
you start at current time and you're kind of working your way backwards as you discover like new rooms, and eventually you get back to like the origin of like the first guy.
So the narrators for the most part would be the heads.
The heads are, they sort of guide you.
Okay, and then you mentioned that a lot of the automatons, the like people that you zombify, they work and then they sort of die. So are we not? Is it fair to say that we won't see a lot of characters that we get attached to that we meet at the bar?
Oh,
Is that fair
that's
to
a good
say?
question. Well, I see that the bar patrons will probably be kind of cycling. Like they're not going to be the same every time you go in.
Okay, but the heads will have more of like a personality than versus the patrons.
Yeah, we were talking about the heads being kind of like themed as the decade. There'd be
Yeah.
like the hippie head from the
That'd be
60s
cool,
and whatever,
yeah.
right? And then the bar would look different as well. Like there'd be pictures of the bar in that particular time, right?
Nice.
So that as you kind of go back in time, you realize you're going, back in time. There's also the possibility of some kind of time travel going on, but that's some serious scope creep.
Cool. Yeah, those are all my questions. Yeah,
Awesome.
Great presentation, man.
Thank
That was
you.
awesome.
Great
Yeah.
questions.
Really,
Thank you.
really cool. To answer your direct question, I think it was very clear to me. I got it. Not only that I got it, actually, in some places I thought like as soon as I saw the image, I was like, okay, I got it.
That's
So
good.
yeah, it was pretty clear. Yeah. So and I love the fun of it and the lightheartedness, and you can't go wrong with all the all futures sort of past futuristic technology and zombies, like that's a win already. So you got me hooked there. A few things that I wish I had more of is because it was really heavy on the gameplay and really thin on the world, which in general I think is a good way to go. I just think the balance was just for me a little bit. I wanted to. I already knew so much about the gameplay, and I know so little about the world. I would like to have known more about the future thing, about about why am I doing all this, about just a little bit of the story. Maybe if there's is there an element of, and I don't know if there is, but I thought it would be fun if there is an element in the game of some kind of a detective or somebody trying to figure out where all these people are going, or some kind of consequences, so that you don't feel that you're in a completely manufactured world in which nothing matters, nothing has consequences. Just a little bit of it, because I know that it's funny. It shouldn't be, of course, it's all fun and games, but I was missing a little bit of that realism.
I like that. I like that.
Maybe like if you keep dumping the bodies somewhere, there's some sort of
Well, they just
incompetent detective that's on your trail or something. I
well,
don't know.
eventually they just become raw material and they go into feed the
Oh,
next
they
machine,
become
right?
goo.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
yeah.
Perfect crime.
But people would be missing. I think part of it though is would they miss these particular people because it's supposed to be just like this bar on the edge of like the highway and someone's gonna miss them. But
Um, I was thinking, what do we get out of the bodies decaying and disappearing? Because I'm imagining. One second, I'm imagining. If one machine, the first machine has to keep continuing on in order to activate the next one and the next one. Then you go into the house and you always go by those, people you dealt with, like in
right,
three
right.
game hours before, like they're like dozens of people just doing, it's just fun image kinetically to be around. If that makes sense.
And sorry, what were you saying about them decaying though, or just that? Yeah,
I mean, they can decay, but I thought, okay, maybe I got it wrong. I thought they were sort of decaying until they no longer operate and you need to replace them.
yeah. I'm still a little bit sketchy on that particular detail as to whether it's how much it makes sense. Because on the one hand, I like that they you have to like maintain them or replace them. I also really like the idea that maybe one of them like their arm falls off, but it's still doing the thing on the floor. You
Yeah.
know,
I
but
just like the idea of this machine that you're made of people that you're building over time, and then it's just like you go into a room and you have those people just working on endlessly
right,
forever.
yeah,
Um, uh, what else? Chain puzzles. Why did I write that? Because I thought maybe there are some puzzles that have several. Um, I just thought that you have two very cool devices: the recorder and the enslaver.
Enslavatron, yeah,
I thought you could do more with that, and even go like, okay, in order to get that person to put the coin into the thing, I need to do this. So I need to get that person, I need to record him, and then
oh, I like that.
the other guy to make him do that motion that I need him to do, and then I record him and go back to the.
That's a great idea.
Uh, yeah, and then the one thing that I really needed, and maybe you had it there and I wasn't really getting it, but is the end goal of the game. Like, what is it? Is it to make the whole mansion yours, or is it to solve a mystery, to get
it
to
it
know detail? What is it?
yeah, I think it's probably not completely clear to the player, and maybe that's an issue. Like what your end goal is. Really, your end goal is just to get to the next room. Like it's a progressive end goal. So you are discovering, you're kind of revealing the backstory, but you're not. There isn't a clear like thing that okay, when this is done, I'm done, kind of thing. And maybe there should be.
I tend to, after the first maybe one level, the tutorial, maybe one other level, I tend to want to know what my end
Right.
game. Otherwise, why am I playing the game? I don't like games personally. I don't like games where I get stronger and then the monsters get stronger, and it's like, okay, fine,
Yeah.
but why am I doing this?
Yeah. The idea is that there's definitely layers of story that are revealed there, so that there's some kind of payoff when you get to that next room. But we haven't really worked out what all that is yet. Um,
I think at least narratively, like you don't need to like have anything beyond each room. There's more stuff to do, but like I think it would be cool to like sell that fiction of the self-running house, or like like if you complete the first room, now there's a tray appears and it's got a cocktail in it, and it's like
Yeah.
some fun VR thing. You pick up the drink and all the water spills out, like just something silly like that, just some silly gag gift.
right.
To like make it feel like this is something that my character in the game wanted, because he answered this Nigerian email. He's
Right.
not the smartest, or the person's not the smartest person, but they want material wealth.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's a really good point. And those are things that, well, the idea of the home automation, I should sort of just back up a little bit. So the Nigerian chain letter thing kind of is not the original concept. The original concept was that your uncle left you the mansion and that he had been building this house of the future that had things very much like you're describing. And so we're sort of kind of still trying to keep elements of that, but you know, sort of moving it into the newer idea. But definitely, yeah, stuff like that. My question though is that enough to keep you going? Like to find sort of a, you know, an automation that doesn't actually move the story forward or unlock something.
For me, I need a bigger thing. I need to, you know, maybe even just the future thing. I want to see the next era. I want to see the 70s. I want to,
Yeah.
maybe it's even that. But if you add something I want to know, like a piece of a mystery that I want to know, and it's only at the very end, to me that would hold me better. And then you have the gifts and the unlocking and all that. That's niceties on the way, but in the end, I'm here to reveal that one thing that I really want.
Yeah, I feel like with going back to like Myst, that they don't immediately present you with what you have to do on the island. Kind of the whole first part of the game is what the hell is this?
Right.
So if as long as those mechanics keep opening up things that intrigue the player, that's enough of a carrot to dangle them along. But you could also do something like you answer the Nigerian email and you go with your wife, and the second you enter the house, your wife disappears and you kind of find your wife. You know what I mean? There's all different kinds of carrots you can use to dangle the player along. One other thing I was going to say, I was just thinking about it, with the mechanic that you have, like the mechanic that you described, even with those two very simple devices, you basically have like the portal gun from Portal. Like there's a million different things you could do with it. And you could do a bunch of different gags too, like on the way to the bar, if you recorded a dog licking its balls and then played it back on the patron in the bar or something like that. Like, you could have a lot of really funny moments there. You know what I mean? I feel like there's a lot you could do with like those mechanics.
I do like, I mean, that's something we haven't thought about at all, was the sort of playing it back on somebody else.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, and that should be totally possible. Although one of the reasons that I think I was moving away from that a little bit was that it means that you could kind of just reprogram like the zombies you might already have, or
oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. You want it to be like a one-time.
It's something like
shot.
It's kind of like you're locking it into that person, right? Like who, you know, the one that that sort of created it. But I do really like this idea of playing it back and sort of, you know, making that a more complex puzzle. The dog licking its balls is hilarious.
Yeah, I just thought of that while you were talking.
How about Sarah, Alex, Sunny?
Yeah, I actually had, I was wondering about, are there consequences at all, say, for if you let the slaves like completely decay and the machine stops working? Like, do you get thrown back a few levels? Do things get harder? Like, what type of things happen then?
That's a good question. Really, the only consequences we've sort of thought about are that you know, the chain breaks, or the machine stops running and you need to go back and kind of fix it. So kind of one of the ways that I've envisioned this is that every machine kind of helps to maintain like another machine, or maybe not everyone, but some of them. So for example, like that original machine, you're kind of, you know, you're generating goo, and maybe, you know, the other machine, like to keep the you know, the guy who's like keeping the lights on, to keep him from decaying, you have to, like, you know, build a little pipeline of goo from the first machine to, like, you know, supply him and like keep him going. So that you kind of sort of effectively build this a little bit of a Rube Goldberg machine, or just something that's sort of maintaining itself. So if one link of that chain breaks, then, you know, maybe everything's going to fall apart. Also at the same time, I don't want it to be, you know, you're running around and just like you know, maintaining the stuff you've got. To some degree, I think that would be fun, like that's kind of keeping the balls in the air sort of idea. But I think there's a fine line between that getting frustrating and being interesting. So yeah,
you can do it as part of the story, you know, like maybe as a part of the story. At some specific point in the story, something falls apart, and but if it's constant maintenance, yeah, I think
right.
That's probably not where you want to be.
it would be kind of nice to sort of, once you get out of a room, to sort of lock that off. Like, okay, that's gonna just keep going,
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, like you've already set up whatever pipes are going to bring goo to that person
That's right,
or
yeah. So
something.
By the way, I love the idea that you just presented, that there are other pieces of the, because it can get a bit old after a while that you keep recording those people, but all of a sudden you have to build that pipeline. So now you have to find some pipes and just put them, just to break the monotony of that one gameplay.
Right.
I find
I actually, another idea that I didn't really talk about in there was that the final room, the one that you end up being the head in the jar, and of course there's some sort of like, crazy machine that, decapitates you at the end, right? It's like you don't realize you've been building all towards like basically getting decapitated and becoming head of the jar. But in that last room, you've got some leeway, so you actually assemble the machines in that room from like different pieces of maybe other machines that have come before it, and so that there's a little bit of more control, which could even be some kind of crazy shared multiplayer something or other. Everyone's sharing their like crazy machines. I can't remember what question I was answering with that, but just that idea that you have a little bit of agency about creating the machines in the first place, and maybe that is sort of integrated along it, so you're not always just figuring it out, but at some point you become the creator.
Do you think that like each person in the machine would be sort of a unique cog in that machine, or that would be more like the game Lemmings, where it's like they're one of 8 different mechanics in the machine? What are you thinking?
So you might need multiple people on one machine.
Okay.
Or is that,
but like,
is that
let's say, well, no, I'm thinking more, let's say there's a guy that
I like that idea though.
in one room. Oh, thank you. There's one guy in a room. He's doing sort of one action. I don't know why I pictured it, but that Simpsons episode where Bart's I'm gonna come at you like this. There's nothing you can do about it. And he sort of does that for one room, but then maybe I might see that character again 3 rooms from now. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like there's a fixed number of pieces that you make a machine from, or is it that each machine has a collection of unique pieces, or somewhere in between?
Well, I would like to think that it's a progression in terms of complexity. So if you figure out the first machine is this, and then you find another machine that's got that, but or it got something else, and then you find one that's got the 2 of those together, then you've sort of learned how to, okay, now I know that those are the 2 things I'm looking for, but I need to maybe get them together. Like maybe
that's cool,
and maybe it is more than one person operating that machine before it actually functions. That's something we hadn't thought about, and I really like that idea of having multiple people. It's a good way to ramp.
Oh, thank you.
Sarah, you had another thing?
Pardon?
Yeah, I thought you started saying something before.
Oh no, we lost her.
Oh.
Sorry, I was getting a Hangouts call at the same time.
Oh, okay.
I had another question. So you're saying how sometimes you have to say, put a coin in a jukebox to get them to start doing certain motions. I was wondering, say if you were trying to shoot goo at them and you missed, do you have that interaction, like they start getting mad at you and attacking you? Is that a thing that the people in the bar might do?
That's another really good question. It raises that whole point of like, also what happens when the goo wears off? Or and we had thought about that as well. You come back to the mansion and the pipe that was supplying the goo is broken, and all the zombies are like they're all like coming after you. Originally the concept was, and I kind of pared this back because I thought it was too much, was that you have a certain amount of goo in your gun, and that it's and that if you miss, then you got to like mop it up and like try again. I'm not sure that's quite the question you were asking, but maybe I answered your question in the other way.
It answered actually kind of like my next question, but okay. I was more so just wondering about, I guess, the interactions with the people in the bar. Like, can it get, say, dangerous for your person if they are like, hey, why are you shooting goo at me? And they start is there confrontation ever?
Yeah, I think ideally there should be. However, again, I think there's this sort of suspension of reality that I'm willing to enable in order for the game to actually be functional. And one of those is that, as I was saying, in the bar, there are people just doing like the same things, you know, and to some degree, and this is what I did the kind of original pitch a few weeks ago. Someone raised this sort of idea that in fact this whole game is like a metaphor for society in like a lot of ways. Like there's all kinds of different ways you could look at it as like, yeah, we're all automatons and blah blah blah.
They're
And
already zombies.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And that I really kind of like that. But in some, if you think about it that way, then when you go into this bar, which is just basically everybody going through the motions of what they're always, you know, it sort of almost makes a little more sense. But like realistically, they should be wandering around and doing whatever, and you know, like for you to find them doing this one thing, would you have to be watching them all day? Like it would just, you'd never do it, right? It's not practical. There was a crazy idea that we kicked around last week, which was that you have some sort of time looping beam that you wash the bar with first, and that like locks everybody into like what the last 30 seconds of what they were doing, you know, which sort of makes it make more sense. But again, you know, I'm okay with the suspension of reality.
Yeah, I think both sound like it could be fun to do.
Yeah, I'm just a little, you know, I think that would make sense. I just, you know, I'm always really, there's already enough scope to creep here that, whether that becomes an issue for people or not, you know, they start trying it out.
Level, you have to try it out and see,
Yeah.
you know
That's right. That's definitely a question that's going to come up, though. Why didn't that guy, you know, come after me, or why are they all doing the same 30-second loop? You know, it's a perfectly valid question.
There's I want to give first of all, I wanted to give Sunny and Alex a chance, but I just wanted to say there could be an answer in design. If the design is super simple and low poly and it's VR anyway, so you would need that. That kind of gives you some leeway to act, you know, just like South Park with the design, they're
Right.
able to every time and nobody cares, that kind of thing.
That's a good point.
Sorry, yeah. So Sunny and Alex, because we're almost out of time, I wanted.
Yeah, Mike, that was a really good pitch. It's like silly enough that it's like right up my alley. So I had a couple questions regarding. So we have maintenance and we have like story-driven elements of like the essence of like capturing somebody, bringing them to the house.
Right.
When we're collecting people just for goo, how long do you expect a player to do that for?
I really only saw that as the way to teach them how to use the Enslavatron.
Okay.
And I'm thinking that's why. You know what? That's a good little plot hole. Because ideally, what should happen is that you should somehow, I don't know, train another zombie to go and use the Enslavatron, or like how do you keep this constant supply of like goo going, right? That's a big plot hole that I think we haven't addressed. Sorry, what was your question again?
So how long do you expect a player to
do that? Yeah,
constantly collect goo?
That's a
or
good
the other question could be, how long does goo last?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, maybe it is that, you know, filling it with one person is going to create a fair amount of goo, like enough to power that entire room for a while, kind of thing. It's a good question. It's something that I haven't really, you know, maybe it's a hole that we've kind of missed.
Sure. Okay.
We have thought about like different levels of goo refinery. So it's like there's a certain type of goo that's like, you know, that first one that you make that kind of like maybe powers the head and maybe the other zombies, and then there's another machine that like refines it into like the time looping goo, or et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of little niddly bits that really haven't been worked out yet, but what you raised was a very good question.
I mean, if we're into weird technology, like magic-y technology already, why not have a multiplicator? So you can multiply people.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And then so you can program a bunch of people to get into the goo maker. So after a while, you know, after level number 5, 4, whatever, you don't need to worry about goo anymore because you took care of that.
Okay. Yes. That's
I had
cool.
another question. What country is this going to be based in?
That's a really good question.
Romania.
Well, you know, I'm kind of
I was
thinking
going to say
of
it sounds like Transylvania, so Romania.
that's wow. You know, that's another question we haven't thought about at all, but that would be awesome. Yeah, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I mean, I guess I've been kind of thinking like, you know, Victorian England mansion and maybe, you know, U.S. biker bar, but maybe that doesn't really match. What country? Romania?
And then my last question is, do you unlock kind of any abilities or any new technology to help you enslave more people or to speed things up?
Yes, yeah, and I mean the idea was that all the little devices, like the first two that I showed you, are actually modular, and the design's probably going to need to change to make that work, but effectively they just like snap into each other and become like a new functionality on that thing. Um, that would probably make more sense if you know, build the device almost Zelda-like, right? It's like, you know, you have the one device that works in that room, and then the next room you'd have to, you know, build something else, or maybe you just take off the Enslavatron and you build, you know, the other pieces, if that makes any sense. But absolutely, yes. The idea is that there are more devices
Okay.
and other functionality. We just haven't determined what it is yet.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a chance. Oh, okay, cool. So thanks for your pitch. It was really cool. I wanted to ask about my connection acted up a little bit in the middle of it, so I want to ask in terms of the movements and the repeating loop every 30 seconds when you're in the bar.
Yeah.
Is the movement going to be exactly the same movement that you need for the machine?
Well, someone in the bar will have that movement, yeah.
So in terms of that, I was wondering, would it be something that you would consider to maybe add, like you could modify the movement just slightly? That way, you're looking within the bar for a movement that's close enough to what they could do for the machine, and then sort of program them once you've enslaved them to modify it just slightly, like a hand movement. They're already doing the correct arm movement up and down, for instance, like you showed with the lever,
Right.
but maybe the hand movement needs to be slightly different to go along with that arm movement, something like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Haven't thought of it quite in that way. Again, it's kind of a scopy sort of thing, but again, that could be a good way to sort of ramp stuff up and you know, create more complex puzzles. The closest I've thought about that is what I was saying earlier, and that you might combine maybe the top of one person and the bottom of another one. Getting into actually kind of posing the characters, I'd say I'd probably been avoiding that just again because of scope creep, but you could potentially, you know, go in and grab their hands and, you know, adjust them. I also still haven't quite figured out how they get onto the machines. Like, I think that would probably just be a, you know, one of those auto magic kind of deals, just to make it easy.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of style, when you were talking about it, something that a few things that popped into my mind, at least, about the way it might be envisioned is that sort of 1950s sort of like, what's the word? It's mid-century modern sort of look.
There's mid-century modern and retro-futuristic was one of the ones I was looking at, yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of imagined combining those like sort of pinks and greens and blues of that era, but with like an Addams Family kind of vibe. So like it would be kind of an interesting contrast, because you'd have these bright pastel kind of colors, but you'd also have like maybe a Morticia kind of character or something in the bar, just kind of like very dark, but like doesn't think anything of it.
Right. Yeah, initially, as I think I did mention somewhere in there that the initial concept was that you had inherited this mansion from your uncle. We kind of changed that, and that would have been more like the vision of the future from the 50s. But then we kind of came up with the idea that it actually originated much farther back. However, I do still want to do the thing where there are different kind of eras of the bar. so that there would be an era of the bar which is in the 50s. And so the room that you go into, like with the head from the 50s, I'm not sure if you heard that part, probably, would be like maybe decorated like that, and maybe that's where those kind of contrasting styles like would come out, because it's going to be basically the Victorian mansion but with elements of that particular era.
For sure. And in terms of the location, that when that was asked about, I also had thought it would be interesting to play with the idea of the American nuclear family.
Right.
And the sort of idealism of that mixed with this sort of macabre setting.
Right. Yeah, like I said, that was kind of the original idea, was sort of the nuclear family, retro-futuristic vision of the future, automation. It's funny trying to find pictures of that. They're all pictures of kitchens with like, video phones and stuff. Definitely that was one of the original ideas, and what we settled on was basically that, but just set it back like, another 70 years. So instead of being the vision of the future from the 50s, it's the vision of the future from like, the late 1800s.
For sure. Okay. Well, thanks very much. I don't think I have any other questions.
Those are really great questions. You guys have like just added so many cool ideas here. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I'm gonna call it because it's we're even kind of a few minutes beyond, but it was a nice lively conversation. Great stuff.